Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is the 162nd Governance and Risk meeting here at MakerDAO. My name is Peyton Rose. I go by Pros11 on the forums, and I am one of the governance facilitators. Today, we're joined by a bunch of awesome Maker people curious about our ecosystem, and we're already working and collaborating within it. This is kind of our weekly get-together. We'll go over some of what's been going on governance-wise in the past week, as well as then we'll dive into a community discussion. And if there's time, there'll be an open Q&A and room for more discussions at the end there. Excellent. Yeah, so I think that more or less does it in terms of housekeeping things. Is an open meeting, so please do let us know if you have questions. We'll be keeping an eye on the chat if you don't happen to have a mic or aren't able to ask your question yourself. Otherwise, if there's a pause in conversation, feel free to unmute and let your question fly. We will be kind of talking about a bigger, broader topic today, so sometimes that's cause for more disagreement or more opinions to come to light, which is always a good thing. Just try not to talk over one another, and we'll get to everybody's point just as soon as we can. Awesome. So without further ado, I will take us away into the votes update on terms of what's been going on the past week here. So we had a bunch of polls pass. The two from Monday were two green light polls, the solid block detox digital coins and the commercial real estate assets drop token. Both of those passed their green light. And then we had 5 polls in our weekly cycle. They were all on offboarding collateral types, that of that LRC 0x, the UniV2 tokens, the Link ETH pair and the Aave ETH pair. And those offboarding polls passed as well. So you will be seeing those on the executive tomorrow. There is one poll currently running, and that is yet another green light poll for staked ETH and ETH curve pool. And I mentioned the exec, so the previous week's exec for offboarding the USDT collateral and core unit budget distributions passed and executed this week. Tomorrow's executive will include a few things, primarily offboarding the collateral types just mentioned in the last slide, as well as taking care of the collateral engineering services core unit budget and risks MKR vesting budget. So those are kind of cleanup items that we still need to include from that we tried to get in last week's, but that'll be there tomorrow. So do keep an eye out for that executive. Awesome, that should do it for the votes. Next up is going to be our MIPS update from our MIP editor, Pablo.
Hey everyone, Pablo here. Welcome to a new MIPS update. So the formal submission window for October's governance cycle closed yesterday. We'll now do a quick review of the formally submitted proposals. We have a technical MIP DSS charter, a module that supports institutional and long-term vaults. We have 3 core units, Maker Labs by Shupi, Data Insights by Atomic, and Deco Fixed Rate by Vamsi, and 2 core unit budgets for growth covering a total of 8 months, and for content production covering 6 months. Our ratification polls will go up on Monday 11th and run for 2 weeks until Monday the 25th. And now for stuff in RFC. We've had a number of recent additions. Let's run a quick review. We have a MIP 60, intangible asset assignment. We talked about this on in previous calls. We also have a MIP 61, delegate compensation, which tentatively describes how recognized delegates will be compensated. We have a coordinated budget for real world finance, including an MKR compensation plan and for governance communications. A sub-proposal for adding a special purpose fund for a feasibility study. A sub-proposal for amending the MIP 6 application template that adds real world asset specific questions. A coordinated proposal set for ImmuneFi Security, whose mandate is to secure MakerDAO through multiple angles by leveraging its existing security community and expertise. And a coordinated proposal set for Sidestream Auction Services, whose mandate is to improve security, transparency, and accessibility of the Maker protocol by providing and maintaining auction services through open source developments. As for the MIPS portal, we're currently working on some user experience improvements on mobile, improved visual consistency in general, and bug fixing. And that's pretty much all from me. Thank you, everyone.
Appreciate that update, Pablo. And yes, as you mentioned, was formal submission this week. So do look for a bunch of ratification polls coming out on Monday. All right, that'll bring us to our last general update here, the forum at a glance from Artem, if you want to take it away.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Forum at a Glance, a weekly review of what's happened on the forums for the week of September 30th to October 7th. Let's begin with the top announcements. So figuring out executive content for core unit budgets has become time-consuming for GovAlpha. There has also been a lack of clarity in some of these budget proposals, and in response to this, Long for Wisdom announced a new mandatory budget implementation standard for all existing and new core units. Next up, there's been a lot of discussion around delegate compensation and its parameters. Psychonaut follows up on the subject by introducing MIPS 61 delegate compensation, which is a template proposal describing how recognized delegates will be compensated. Moving on to the top 3 discussions, and I'm pretty confident that almost everyone has seen Rune's post, but MakerDAO has significantly evolved over the last several years. With so much opportunity ahead of us, Rune envisions Maker reaching its true potential by becoming a purpose-driven DAO with a compelling vision. He promotes that we can use the power of DeFi to adopt the principle of clean money and sustainable finance to help coordinate a global build-out of sustainable energy pathways for clean energy products. The core of his clean money initiative consists of tokenomics system of the Sagittarius engine, which would replace itself as the destination of the Maker protocol surplus, and he provides a tangible benefit to the MKR holders who lock up their MKR in governance for long periods of time. There's a lot more in this post, too much to talk about, so check it out. All right, next up. MakerDAO currently has no legal structure registered in any jurisdiction, and Maker is very likely to be classified as a general partnership within the United States, which can lead to multiple risks for the DAO and any individual members of the organization or MKR holders. In response, Paper Imperium urges that we find solutions to these problems as soon as possible. He offers some solutions in the post, but promotes serious discussion on the subject. And finally, Wintermute submits a proposal to provide market-making services to MakerDAO. The proposal involves loaning 10,000 MKR to Wintermute Trading, who will either return the loan in full or provide 50 million USDC, representing a 100% premium to the current price of MKR. You can watch their introduction on this proposal on last week's Governance and Risk call. On to signal requests. We have one signal request that will be open until October 19th. In reaction to Rune's post mentioned earlier, Planet X signals to turn off the buy and burn, keep the surplus buffer at 60 million DAI, and direct excess funds of the surplus buffer to the Sagittarius engine. For more information on Forum at a Glance, check out the post. It includes a 3-point summary, evaluations and reports, ongoing initiatives, and help wanted. That's it. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Artem. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. We figured it was going to be a pretty big discussion topic, so we did limit it at 1 for today. However, I do want to encourage discussion, questions, and if there is more time, we can dive into some things deeper. But seeing as we do have Rune on the call with us, figured who better to present the idea than Rune himself. Rune, if you're available, I don't know if you want to share slides or anything, or just talk about the posts, but happy to accommodate either way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to come back to the governance calls and talk about this. I haven't actually I haven't prepared any slides. I really prepare I think I also came today to discuss this this more sort of pressing legal question basically that I think is also really important. But of course, can't really ignore the wall of text dumped on everyone. What was it, last Monday? But yeah, like, I mean, so it's just the thing about this whole thing is that there's so many concepts that are sort of interconnected, and in reality what this all represents is really sort of all the thinking and a lot of like the research I've done, maybe for, you know, maybe you could say over the past 5 years potentially, like it's, you know, which was pretty much the last time I was sort of able to be publicly involved in maker governance, right? So that's the thing, that during a very long period of time, primarily for sort of out of regulatory concerns, I've just had to, you know, I have not been, you know, I've had to create this kind of separation between my role on sort of the team that was bootstrapping Maker and then having a role as an MKR holder in the community. But yeah, like, and I mean, maybe the best sort of angle to try to explain it from is actually it's kind of like my objective with Maker has always been, you know, from the very beginning, literally when the whole thing started, the thing that attracted me so much to it was the idea, oh yeah, you know, all I need to do is just write a white paper, and then sort of the free market will somehow like take care of it and it will be built or something, right? And then it was like, oh, we just need to get this team together, and then it'll become a DAO and it will take care of itself. And then we, you know, then later it was like, oh, we just need to make this foundation, and then we just need to build the thing, and then I can sort of sit back and relax, and it will take care of itself. And now we're done with the foundation, and you know, and now I'm basically at this point where, oh yeah, you know, all we need now is like make it a purpose-driven DAO and put a bunch of things in place and sort of really make this constellation, everything set up, so we can have this ice age. But that's really sort of, I mean, fundamentally, that's always been my, you know, it's always been the point of Maker, right? Is a really sort of autonomous, kind of like, you know, locked down system to some extent, right? I mean, that's obviously the promise of the whole system, right? And then I think additionally, there, like, Maker has always been an extremely, you know, value driven movement, right, and project that's actually been quite different from most of the rest of crypto and DeFi, in that we've had this, you know, both been very sort of idealistic and at sometimes even been sort of arrogant in a sense, and sort of different in that way. You know, that's basically like, I think fundamentally, like, I mean, that first of all is who we are, but it also is just connected in with all these other things, and all of these pieces they're really, yeah, I think fundamentally they're like they're interconnected and necessary, and really, in my opinion, it's like it's really our best, like, from my perspective, it's almost the only way forward in a sense, right? In that we need a plan, a kind of holistic plan that can do the same, that can do something like, you know, that can sort of cover all the things we need to cover, and give us clear direction on how do we get to a point where things are going to kind of calm down. And because, I mean, no matter what, basically, I will eventually leave. I mean, that's going to happen one way or another, basically. But the way I would like to do it is that I can simply sort of, you know, everything can run by itself, and I can just sit back as an MKR holder that delegates and locks into some tokenomics engine or whatever it is we end up with. But the point is, that's sort of you know, that's really the ideal outcome, right? Because so that's where I'm really coming from as an MKR holder, essentially, right? That I'm basically like a really big MKR holder that you know, wants to not be involved, but that's impossible for me when I have so much exposure to the project, and there's not enough sort of, you know, there's simply not enough certainty for someone like me with such an extreme exposure to not basically go in the fray. And I mean, that's a way to think about it, that I'm at the level of exposure to MKR where I'm actually compelled to participate in governance to protect my own interests, basically. Okay, so that, I mean, that's one of the many perspectives, right? Another one is to talk about climate change and the collapse of the whole world, which I think I want to mostly skip over that, honestly. Like, I mean that is but yeah, like, I've got kids now, which is different, so I used to be sort of a collapsitarian with Bitcoin, and the end of the economic meltdown, all this stuff that we thought was going to happen a decade ago. But it gets very different once you have children, and you get this different sort of time line, sort of perspective in terms of time, and yeah, like it is just, it's like climate change is like, it's what's called a black elephant. It's like a combination of black swan and elephant in the room, in that it is actually, and there's like no good answer to it, basically. I mean, putting effort in anything about working or contributing towards the future, or sort of building something up, if you're not like directly, oh yeah, great, my internet is failing now. It's because I got a new iPhone with
You
5G.
did come back in, so
Yeah, no, that's my fancy 5G. That works way worse than my 5-year-old phone. So that's dumb. No, but no, what I was saying is that because of what's happening, is like, if you're anyone that's working on anything and sort of building something up for the future, if they're not like directly dealing with basically the coming collapse of the system, they should really just not waste the time. They should go outside and enjoy nature while it's still there. And that's kind of how that's one of the ways I think to think of this, is just like, I mean, it's most people, it's still not apparent today, but it will over time increasingly become apparent that everything in our lives will be dominated by this stuff. And you're just not going to be like, it's not going to be meaningful to work on something else, because like, first it'll be about sort of protecting the world, and eventually it will be about protecting yourself. And yeah, I really think.
So Rune, can I ask a question?
Oh yeah, of course.
So one thing that struck me as like really interesting about your post, The Case for Clean Money, is this idea of incentivizing an entire solution through advantageous credit facilities and partnerships, and really funneling capital to startups, businesses, et cetera, that are really making a positive impact on the problem. And I'm curious whether your vision has room to expand beyond climate change. So climate change is, of course, one of the biggest problems, and it's definitely pertinent and worthy of focus. I'm curious what other problems you see MakerDAO potentially influencing positively through our protocol, and can we and should we?
Yeah, so it's like, okay, so I want to sort of actually talk about that by talking about something completely different first. But that is, so there's this concept of it's sort of the question of like, oh, I mean, I wrote that somewhere in the post, right? This idea of like, oh yeah, climate change. So that means now we're gonna be a charity and be sort of kumbaya and throw all money away or something, right? And that's kind of that's sort of, that's how it's traditionally viewed, right? And what I'm basically saying is that especially the exact position Maker is in right now, we're actually in a situation where like the public benefit and the personal benefit, like the profits, they're really converging in a sense. Like we really like this direction that I'm advocating for, I believe, is by far the most profitable direction we could possibly take. And it's like, when you actually think about it, it kind of makes sense. I mean, like, as if you're sort of if you've been conditioned by capitalism, then the statement that like doing good should also be the most profitable, that seems like complete nonsense. But like, if you really sort of think about it, like logically, that is kind of how markets actually work, right? Like that's how sort of, and how it would make sense. Like if you're doing something that's good, then that means there's sort of value there, and that's how you should be you know, that's what should be, you should be able to extract value out of that in some sense, right? And that is like absolutely the case for the economic system and the financial system, right? That I mean, it's not very profitable to destroy the planet, right? Like nobody's gonna, like the oil executives' kids are gonna be in trouble too, right? Like no one's gonna benefit, right? It's really this, what's happening is, it's actually not like some conspiracy or some people that are somehow like, you know, taking advantage of everyone else. It's like literally this huge coordination problem that the whole world is engaged in, that's just sort of failing and turning out badly. And that's where, if you can, like, the question is it possible to try to overcome that coordination problem? And then can you actually extract sort of, can you kind of like if you can overcome the problem, you will create incredible amounts of value. And is it possible to sort of tap into that future value and then use that as to sort of as energy to power the push towards trying to overcome this, right? And so I think that it's ultimately from that perspective that I mean, in the end, like, that's how a DAO sort of has to work, basically. That you know, that like, we have to make our decision based on what's benefiting us as MKR holders. Like, so the question is kind of, what are the actions that we can take that that just provides us, you know, that provides us with the biggest benefit, and then as a side effect, but I guess you could say, like, in some sense, as a side effect, it's also creating a lot of positive externality for others, right? Right. So my point is that it's really important, like, we can't operate on the basis of, oh, we feel like this is good, let's do that, or let's also save the world over here and over there, and like, that simply doesn't work, right? I mean, not even if it's like, it doesn't matter if you're some guy trying to fight climate change and you're just like out, you know, people have been trying that for decades, right? And been sort of chaining themselves to trees or whatever, and it doesn't do anything, right? Because it's a systemic and sort of economic problem, and you have to fix it with economics and so on. But anyway, so actually, just to sort of answer the question, like, actually, climate change isn't actually the problem. It's really is sort of capitalism that's the problem, in a sense, like the way the system works. And so so there's both climate change, but there's also like deforestation and ecosystem collapse and social, I mean, in particular, sort of social, what do you even call that? Like decline, basically, right? All of these things are actually all connected to sort of economic systems that just that mass produce negative externalities and don't think, aren't able to consider the long run. And what I think is sort of the magic, to some extent, that Maker can bring to the table is that it's a global currency, right? And a currency really is this like extremely like, you could think of it as like an extremely powerful coordination tool, right? It's definitely used as a coordination tool when it comes to like pricing stuff, right? And like the way prices, they sort of determine how an economy makes decisions, right? But it can also be a coordination tool around like not only how you price things, but then also how you sort of back the currency itself and how you allocate credit and how and like basically that's sort of the other piece of money as a coordination tool. That's not really, like it hasn't really ever, like it's not really been explored much beyond some conversations around like central banks buying social bonds or something like that. But money really is like the perfect, like it's the one tool that sort of is systemic or has the potential to be a systemic tool that can actually provide systemic solutions, basically because it's just so crazy scalable, right? And that's kind of one part of it, is that, and that's where, okay, so that's where, number one, how do we like, one of the most obvious benefits that Maker can get from just doing good, creating positive, like basically funding positive externalities, right? Like how one of the ways it can capture some of the value of that positive externality is through branding, basically. And I think that's where that's a really obvious place where why it makes sense to focus on climate change and like clean money as the brand, and like really have the focus be on climate change. And that's because there's all these things going wrong at once, but climate change is the biggest one, and it's the one everyone's really talking, that's the one that's been talking about the most, right? So so that's a really, and it's really, really important. Like, this is only going to work if we're able to really tap into that kind of the virality essentially of and the sort of the communication aspect of this, right? That we can create clean money that actually produces positive externalities, and then if enough people, if there's enough momentum behind that, then you can get sort of critical mass, right? You can get so much liquidity in the currency that it becomes a world currency, and then the whole sort of system sort of snaps in place, and you actually you get economies of scale and network effects that actually mean that you do have sort of the surplus available to fund all of these positive externalities. So that's kind of one place to look, and that's really the main driver behind sustainable collateral, right? So doing things like renewable energy, and maybe even like really sort of fancy ambitious projects, like trying to fund fusion power or something, like things where kind of you can really like show people, look, this is what DeFi can do. It's a coordination tool. That means if you put your money in DeFi, you're actually building giant wind turbines, right? And you're doing that. It's kind of a computer program that allows individuals to sort of band together, and they don't actually have to do anything. They just have to hold their money in a different asset. But then by doing that, they're creating a real, they're making a real difference in that they can see that directly, right? They can track it. They can see, look, this is actually straight up like constructing wind turbines, right? And that's something that's sort of missing right now, because what you have today is you have this frustration, almost like humiliation, right, of people like having to like drink from paper straws, which I think is the perfect example of like we're sort of doomed, and like the avalanche is coming towards us, and we're engaging in these sort of pointless self-flagellation acts, right, that don't actually do anything. And it's like, instead of sort of just accepting it and then also doing sort of pointless stuff as sort of almost like a punishment, we can create a kind of a message of more of like hope, essentially, right? Whereas like, look, here's something real, right? It's not like a freaking paper straw that doesn't actually do anything. It's actually about like providing a push to the financial system itself. Okay, so that's one big thing. And my point is there, like when it comes to the branding and when it comes to the message, like being clarity and simplicity is really crucial. So that's why like climate change and clean money and sustainable finance from sort of the climate and CO2 pollution angle, I think needs to be front and center, right? Because it's something you can explain to people and it's possible to understand, and it's like people understand why solar panels are beneficial to them and why wind turbines are beneficial to them, and also why coal power plants are not good for them, and so on, right? Then there's this resilience aspect, which is so that's sort of the completely opposite. That's instead of trying to prevent damage, sort of preventing negative externalities and actually creating positive externalities for others. It's more about like sort of capturing, or like capturing the value, or sort of the alpha essentially that's being created in a sense, right, by what's happening right now in terms of pollution and the trajectory of civilization. And that's where it's just like about like literally, scientific governance, and you really and it really becomes a matter of, look, we just need to act based on the data we have available, right? And what's happening today is that climate change is it's a black elephant. So what that means is the financial system sort of could learn about climate alpha and could learn about what's going to happen, but it doesn't do it because it's kind of like the late stage of the 2007 financial crisis, where once you go down that rabbit hole, you have to suddenly reprice so much stuff that is like the numbers just don't check, like the math simply doesn't check out. Like you just, there isn't really an answer for what you do if you start to actually look, like consider the science basically. And that's basically, and so that's really bad. But the opportunity is that Maker can then sort of fill that gap and potentially access assets that are extremely undervalued in terms of other assets that are, you know, that will potentially become, you know, places that will just become desert, for instance, are not being sort of like real estate, and you know, in places that will become deserts are not necessarily being priced accordingly, especially compared to places where, you know, the places that would be the most resilient to climate change. And that's just like straight up something that has to be, you know, that has to be considered fundamentally. But I think what's kind of the most interesting in terms of, again, like how you can create a sort of systemic solution to systemic problems is that if you go, like, if you assume the ability to grow, and if you assume sort of very large scale through strong branding and strong marketing and so on, and you get to a very large scale, then what ends up happening is you start to have a situation where you actually capture a lot of your own positive externality in a sense. So that's sort of the situation where if you have a lot of agriculture in, let's say, you know, like the northern US or something, which is like an area where it's not clear what's going to, you know, it's not clear whether that's going to be, you know, where the you know, like depending on what happens when it comes to emissions reduction, then there are, you know, there are these sort of areas where you simply don't really, like, you don't really know whether they're resilient, you know, whether they're going to make it or not, essentially. And what's interesting is that you can sort of, you can then have, if you have a large enough scale, you can sort of make investments into places that are in the, you know, where you're sort of, you're not, it's not clear whether they will, you know, you don't know exactly sort of the climate alpha, essentially, right? You don't know whether is this land actually going to be arable or not. But you can, you know, but you can then actually have an impact on that uncertainty if you also do an investment into sort of producing the, you know, producing positive externalities or producing sustainable energy, right? Just like this synergy between, let's say, whatever, agriculture in an area that is vulnerable to climate change, and then sustainable energy, right, that prevents climate change from happening. And that's, you know, so that's when you can get, you know, basically you can get to a point where you can, you know, you're able to somewhat sort of overcome the tragedy of the commons, because you're able to actually, in a sense, sort of capture the value. Yeah, like you're able to sort of capture the value that's created by overcoming the tragedy of the commons. And then because you can capture the value, you can then fund the effort in the first place. Yeah, and then, I mean, then there's one, like, well, there's many other things to mention, but there's also like this whole political aspect, and that's kind of also, we even talk about it now, like tax and legal risk and all of this stuff. And there's a huge part to it as well, right? That basically the main thing we consider to Maker all the time is legal risk and USDC blacklisting risk. And we know for a fact, I mean, my experience after having dealt with that for years, right, in the context of DeFi, is really the way that politicians and regulators think is like literally like, does it look like a bad guy or does it look like a good guy, right? And if it looks like a bad guy, they'll much more likely to go after it. If it looks like a good guy, they'll hold off a bit, right? And that's basically the thing. Like, we just, I mean, it's not like we can break the law or become immune to regulation or something because we're a bunch of eco warriors, right? But it does absolutely matter in the sort of the big picture of politics, and especially if you create, you know, and this is when then there's this whole concept of like the super countries, like especially if you combine sort of both political efforts with marketing efforts and sort of adoption efforts, and if you combine all these things together, you can really create very powerful sort of security in countries that are sort of naturally, I guess you can say, naturally decentralized, basically, like countries that have that are democratic, strong rule of law, these things, you can really embed yourself and entrench yourself in those kind of systems. And yeah, like the number one way to do that is to have some way to be relevant and so to sort of create a kind of a reason why people should care, right? And so it sort of boils down to, they're just, you can like be, yeah, right, like if DeFi is just about making money and getting rich quick and so on, it is there's a much greater regulatory risk in that situation than if it's actually about experimenting with cutting edge technology to figure out how that can help society, right? Yeah, so that's another big advantage, and sort of another reason why, just in the end, it's like the profitable way to go, and that's not a bad thing. Like, the fact that going green is profitable is actually, it's not a bad thing. It's a fantastic thing, right? Because only if suddenly the entire planet starts realizing, wow, if we all do this, we make more money, right? That's the only way it can possibly be solved. So it's really important to sort of really sort of create that connection between how do you benefit from providing others with a benefit. But there's really no system that can more easily be in that position than a currency, I think, and especially how Maker is set up. It's just really sort of perfectly set up. I'll just ramble a little bit more and then I'll stop. But so then there's this whole question like scale and all the benefits and all this stuff we can do, and climate alpha and sustainable collateral, and then there's a part of the proposal is the whole thing about tokenomics, and what I call unleashing the superpowers of DeFi, right? So really, like, we have all these advantages that we can tap into, but most of them are based around scale, essentially, and based around sort of this future value that could be created if we can just overcome this coordination problem. And then, like, that's where tokenomics and sort of the DeFi sort of black magic that has been invented in DeFi summer and in this space, it's a perfect fit for this kind of situation, because it's exactly what we need, is this kind of ability to sort of create value and create energy out of nothing based on a future promise, or based on attention, essentially, right? That's what you need to help people sort of and drive them in the direction of understanding, if we all work together, we all make more money than if we all work against each other, essentially. And tokenomics and yeah, like tokenomics, yield farming, these concepts, they're actually ways to sort of like do that in a very direct economic sense, right? Through actual cash flows. So that fits particularly well with like a real sort of vision and a real purpose that actually is genuine. I believe that's like the strongest place possible where you can put these kind of like aggressive tokenomics. And I think, what I argue is sort of the best example of like why strong vision and a real genuine purpose and public good and sort of this excitement and sort of yeah, like vision, I get basically around that, right? Like why that actually drives value. Like the perfect example of that is Tesla, right? Like, which is like the most valuable company, was actually had this like the thing that really drove it. I don't know if they're the most valuable anymore, right? But like when they sort of pumped to the most valuable company in the world, it was absolutely because it had this sort of science fiction, like solar punk narrative to it, right? And that's exactly what we can do as well, right? We can use tokenomics, we can use this kind of vision, and we can use it to really just drive this sort of ability to convincing the world that this is something that can actually grow, it can actually make a difference, it can actually become huge. And the last tiny thing I want to talk about is sort of the internal, and this is sort of the last part of the post, right? This is basically how also vision and purpose and ultimately altruism is actually fundamental for governance in a DAO to even work at all. And so that's because a DAO doesn't have regulation, or it doesn't have an authority. So it's extremely vulnerable to basically corrupt. I mean, in the long run, what's basically corruption. I mean, in a normal company, the way you deal with corruption and ultimately is through like shareholder protection, right? And that's ultimately enforced by the government, and the government ultimately like only works because it's in some sense driven by some kind of greater purpose, right? Some kind of altruistic cause, right? Even if it's the government itself is also corrupt, the thing that still prevents them from absolutely falling apart is this sort of shared vision of a nation, right? And because a DAO doesn't have a government that's regulating it, then I believe that it needs to have this kind of sort of greater good, kind of like shared purpose and shared vision built into the DAO itself for it to function. Because if you don't have that, if a DAO is entirely about profits, then the problem is that profits and sort of making money is simply not a shared. It's not a shared vision, right? It's like an individual thing that everyone makes money, and so it's great if everyone comes together and makes money together as a group while they're working together. That's great. That's going to encourage them to work together. But the problem is, as soon as you present someone with an option to make more money by sort of defecting, then if the only thing that's driving them is money, then they're going to defect, right? And the perfect example of that is something like voter apathy. Like, why should I pay money to vote or spend time to vote if I'm not getting anything, right? And like, because I'm getting the money no matter what, and I'm here for the money, so why bother doing anything to that's not gonna give me more money, right? And instead, if people are they're motivated by the money, but they're also motivated by something beyond that, then you get, then it's like, what's the reason why someone should go in and actually vote, even though it doesn't directly benefit them? Well, that's because the whole, the way they benefit is because the whole thing has this greater purpose that aligns with their own sort of vision of the world, right? And then you can actually you can sort of draw out this motivation from within people to actually just be sort of the contribute to the greater good in the DAO, because the DAO contributes to sort of the greater good in the world. So nobody wants to be the sucker that like volunteers their time to help make a bunch of other people rich, right? Like that's very demotivating. So if there needs to be something beyond that, and I think that's completely critical. And then there's the whole piece of like the core units and sort of the bureaucracy that exists in Maker around governance, which is completely unique and unlike anything else anywhere in crypto. And it needs a kind of, like it's guaranteed that if it doesn't have some kind of very strong kind of I call like an immune response, kind of like something that really sort of tries to almost like, I guess, keep it clean essentially, then it's guaranteed that when you have some kind of like a big bulky bureaucracy in a DAO, over time that's gonna absolutely corrupt. But the problem is, again, that like if you have a bunch of people that are working for the DAO and they're working their ass off and they're like in all this chaos and complexity and uncertainty, and then you come and impose a bunch of bureaucratic requirements on them and sort of treat them as, you don't even trust them, right? And you're putting a bunch of bureaucracy on them, and you're sort of creating a system that assumes they're hostile, and which you ultimately have to do in a bureaucracy that has the potential to become corrupt, right? But if all of that is happening and the entire context for that is just so people can make money, then then people are either they're going to need huge amounts, just crazy high compensation, or they're going to go corrupt and they're going to get their money that way, or they're just going to quit and not bother dealing with it, right? And the only way that this is like that realistically this makes sense and makes sense for people to dedicate their time and their energy to this, right, is if again there's some kind of motivation beyond just being about money. All right, that I don't know how, that was probably half hour. I think that's good enough for now. Yeah.
Thanks, Rune.
Rune Radio.
Hi, Rune. I have a question. How many details around this proposal have you worked out yet?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like, so I would actually say that, I mean, so the thing is, that's kind of how I approach sort of everything with Maker, is that at any time I always have like a complete answer and solution to everything. You can ask me anything and I have like, this is what I think is the right choice for pretty much anything. But a lot of the time I'm not actually right, and later it turns out I'm wrong. But I still actually have this sort of very like high levels of clarity around sort of a lot of stuff in general. So the point is like, I do have very specific ideas around how to do a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about. But in the end, that's actually not really like this, that doesn't necessarily matter that much, because the reality is that all of this stuff has to be worked at. Like the whole exercise here, and like I said, like that's the first thing I said, right? My goal is that the outcome of doing all these things should be that, in particular me, but also anyone else, can just pull out, right, and not be relied on, right? So it would be a hilarious or tragic mistake for me to try to sort of just be like, okay, here's the the McDonald's book of how to do everything, and really just try to sort of micromanage or come up with all sorts of specific proposals. I mean, but what I do want to do very much is to try to work collaboratively with the governance community, and in particular MKR holders and sort of the people that really represent MKR holders, to try to like figure out sort of what is the governance perspective on how to do different things. And so then Wouter just made he just made this comment, like, also the question is this even like, what are even, like, do we even want to move forward on this, and like what are actually the high level principles, and sort of there's a lot of steps, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done, and all of it needs to be done in the community. And it simply is sort of, it's pointless to not do it. I mean, it's pointless to do it any other way than completely as a sort of decentralized community process, right? And that's in the end, like, that's really, right, that's actually what I'm doing. In fact, I haven't done anything yet. I've just written a huge wall of text. But like, this is the amazing thing is everything is in place so that we as a community can implement things like what I'm suggesting, using all of the infrastructure, systems, governance, tooling that's already there. And that's what I think, right? Is I can sort of help be a part of that, and then by going through that process, I think the DAO can come out on the other end as truly sort of, truly in a spot where I can, I'm gonna really pull out for real and focus on my next thing.
All right. So your proposal is can be considered a complete package, or is it possible to perhaps split it up into several sections and do a little bit at a time?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think that. Well, so Wouter, right? He advocates that we figure out kind of some principles that we agree on in order to create clarity, I guess, mainly for the core units. From my perspective, like, I actually didn't think we really, we need to sort of agree on this vision at all, because it's like, basically it's, like, basically it's just my opinion about stuff in the end, right? And even if the DAO does like clean money and all of it, like, it's not, it's going to be its own thing, not sort of, it's going to be an interpretation or a sort of an evolution of what I initially suggested, right? Which I can also myself contribute to, of course, but ultimately, well, the best way to answer is like, it's absolutely is not a complete package, right? I would argue that there is a logical sort of, there's a kind of a logical sort of circularity to it where you can't really do, right? Like, I mean, you could do, let's say, we could do, let's say something like a tokenomics overhaul. We could do that with no other context at all. And that's something where you could absolutely sort of treat that as like its own thing. But the question is if it's, it might actually be, tokenomics is all about narrative, and it might, and this is, now I'm just sort of, but I'm just thinking about like how these examples of like how things sort of fit together, right? That it may not necessarily be a good thing to suddenly pivot on your tokenomics if there isn't some kind of broader narrative to it, because possibly you're basically saying, oh, we had bad tokenomics and now we're trying random stuff to see if we can save ourselves, right?
Yeah. My argument here is that this proposal contains quite a lot of stuff. So an overall implementation plan would not hurt. I mean, what do we do first and in what order? And especially with regards to regulation and the strategy around any tokenomics overhaul. I mean, it's quite a significant amount of work, each one of these items, but we'll get there.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any of this stuff that really can be done in the short run, basically. Like what we could do is something like agree on principles, or something like agree on an attempt, like something like we're going to try to brand ourselves as clean money or something, which, I mean, my intention was not that, I mean, I did not expect that a bunch of media outlets would be like, wow, Maker is going green and stuff, right? I did not expect that's going to happen from just creating a forum proposal. And I actually think the reason why that's happening, I believe, is because it's useful to them, kind of, to the media, kind of like it's useful to some elements in the crypto media, because what they're using it for is they're trying to push back against this mainstream media narrative of Bitcoin being bad for the environment and so on. So I think maybe that does, I mean, I was really expecting that it would take, we would want to discuss this for many months and sort of really consider it as, something we can carefully and deliberately think about theoretically, and take it very slow with, and not really have any sort of external effect. It's possible that because the media is already running with it, that we may be able to actually just say, oh yeah, we clean money now. We haven't actually done anything yet, but we're planning to, and then we can just still actually brand ourselves that way. And to do something like that, we would need some kind of vote for something like that, for instance, right? And that could be like a set of simple principles, and then what that just does is, okay, now there's agreement about like our values and our brand and these kind of things. That's going to inform things like what core units are doing, but may also even what individual DAO members are doing, and what someone like me is doing when I'm out there promoting, on podcasts or whatever, talking about the project. In terms of like practical, like actual practical stuff, that's not just talk or communication. I think in all cases, it's about like a year, it's a year away before, we'll be like what I suggested in the post is the most obvious win that we could get is taking a huge amount of USDC exposure and put it into ESG bonds outside of the US in a trust structure, because and that's sort of that's specific to a bunch of different things, like including, I mean, like the big problem is ESG bonds just aren't really the greatest thing in the world. Like they're kind of like, ESG is sort of the reincarnation of corporate social responsibility to some extent, but less fraudulent, essentially. And but it's still good. Like, and it has sort of a sense of trust, and I think being able to move billions into ESG assets would just like that. It's kind of mind blowing, powerful thing that I don't think that you know, something similar has happened in DeFi basically, and that would be like a huge deal. Yeah. Okay. So
Rene, can
let's
I
give it up to Wilder. Yeah.
add a few words before we move on to the next topic? So I want to explain why I think it's important that we reconfirm support and consensus for a few key principles. I think that what we're doing here is we're clearly making a pivot, right? And the perception of what Maker is about is changing. And once again, it's not the first time when we started with real world assets as a focus. When we added USDC, the perception of what Maker has changed, and a lot of people still haven't gotten over it, right? And I think one unfortunate thing that happened when we switched to real world assets as a focus is that first, like in a sense, Maker became more of a project that didn't belong anywhere, right? Like we weren't as popular anymore with the ETH purists, and yeah, we couldn't like nail down the real world assets narrative strongly enough to immediately create enough interest. And I really don't want to downplay the monumental milestones we've reached, right? So that's not the point. The point is we kind of fell in between two chairs, and people had really like a hard time wrapping their heads around like, what is Maker supposed to be now? Is it just a USDC wrapper? The real world asset stuff, like what is it all about? So definitely now that we're a DAO, when we are going through another change in the perception about what Maker is about, the reality is that people will have to choose sides, right? Like some people will be out if you think that it's a complete strategic disastrous mistake to tie Maker to fighting climate change, then maybe you want to quit, right? And on the other hand, other people will want to join now because where Maker maybe was not meaningful to them before, now it might be meaningful, and you know, we can open the door to new partnerships, new alliances, and so on. And I think in order to get that right, we really have to send a strong signal that this, you know, not leave this hanging up in the air. This is still a proposal. We're still working out the details. We don't know yet exactly what it will look like. But that we send a very strong signal that, you know, these are the core principles that we're going for. In a way, it is a pivot. But you know, that's what it is, right? Like there is no discussion. This is what Maker is about now, and this is the direction we're going in. And this is the kind of clarity. It doesn't mean that we have to agree on the details. It just means that we create clarity around the new direction of the project, and then we should be able to do that like really fast and decisively. And then you have like a clean environment where you can start working out the details once we've all agreed that, you know, this is the long-term direction we're going in. And I think that is incredibly important to to make sure that we can effectively deliver. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty, and people are going to be confused, and there's going to be a lot of confusion again around what Maker is about. And yeah, I think that could be quite bad.
Appreciate you sharing those thoughts, Ryder. There any questions or comments people would like to add to the discussion we've had so far?
So I think there's kind of two things going on here, right? There is one, kind of holistically, does the community kind of share this vision that Rune has presented? And then on the other hand, right, what does this vision entail? I think we need to map out more what are the tangible steps, almost kind of like an imaginary roadmap, if you will, right, of what are the things that we can, the DAO can do immediately, and what are the things, right, that are more kind of a year plus out, right? And I think it's going to be hard for the community to kind of evaluate one without the other, right? And I think that second piece is kind of what's missing at the moment.
Yeah, but that's where I slightly disagree, right? So the problem is it will take us way too much time, way too long to agree on, if you want to like write up a roadmap of like 20 milestones or something, right? It's going to take us forever to agree on the 20 milestones, and the uncertainty that will, the uncertainty will result in like core units not knowing what to do. It will contribute to confusion about, as I said, like what is Maker all about? What is the perception of the core of the project? So by laying that foundation and agreeing on the number of key principles, and just recognizing that we don't have the specifics yet, but these are the principles that we want to share, that we want to gather around, and that we will work out a roadmap that goes in the direction of those principles. I think that could create the context where we can we can get to the point where we productively and constructively like work on actual deliverables. And then indeed, then we need to start looking into what is short term, what can we do in the medium term, and then the really long term goals. But sending that strong signal first, I do really think that that would be a good step to take, because it will create a lot of clarity, I believe. And so I posted my list in chat that I have as a candidate. So I think we should just, I mean, the sentiment seems very positive, and I think that we're all in for the clean money principle. But let's confirm that, right? Let's confirm that in a vote. And the MKR holders that don't agree with it, and that are maybe just sitting it out and seeing if it will actually pass, well, let's just give them a reality check and not leave them hanging, right? And those who want to join because of this new principle, let's give them the opportunity to join for it. So I think my suggestion, the 5 principles of the clean money principle. Do we want to head turning Maker into a force against climate change? Can we reconfirm that we want to continue with decentralization through diversification, which would mean on the one hand, like really doubling down on the real world assets collateral strategy, decentralizing it further, onboarding green collateral types and so on. But then on the other hand, also reconfirming our commitment to crypto collateral, and hopefully, I think we should like refresh our alliances in the Ethereum ecosystem, right? A lot more Ethereum love, I think, from us would definitely be beneficial. And then the last one, this proposal, it chooses growth over conservatism in terms of, for example, reducing spending to make sure that we remain profitable in the short run and burn MKR, right? That last one is a very important one that I think some people will disagree with. And as I said, I think sending that signal or at least like verifying that we have support to do that, it will, it will be a reality check for people, and those who disagreed, they should probably they should probably go their own way. But those who agree with this, they're very welcome to join, right? So I think within that framework, then it's a matter of starting to think about what would the milestones be, and how do we organize as the governance framework, the DAO, and so on, to get these pieces in place. So and I think that would just be a good direction to take.
One thing to add is the perfect way to do this, I think, would be to try to replace the old foundation principles, right? Which pretty much everyone forgot, but in a sense, you can really create it. It could be sort of really a kind of a choice between sticking with the old principles, basically, or switching to sort of a new, sort of upgrading them, because actually that original framework even sort of includes this possibility that it will be changed in the future by governance.
I think also like this comes against a lot of conversations in the last 6 months to a year about MakerDAO's brand direction kind of being loose and undefined, and who sets it, how do we determine it, like that, so this proposal is coming with that as a backdrop. So I definitely think that how we treat this will also affect us as a brand. How we refresh or redesign those principles is going to affect how makers optics, how we look as an organization to the world. So yeah, definitely keep that in mind as well.
So my memory is a little foggy, but I seem to remember the original foundation principles were like, they weren't long, but it was like a page or something, right?
Yeah, there were 5.
Yeah, I know there were 5, but it was like, they were like a paragraph or something for each, right? So is someone volunteering to write these up as a new set of principles, or are we going to go with like sentences?
Yeah, the first ones were easy because it was like the foundation was the obvious person or entity to like propose those. But now that we have like a bunch of decentralized core units, I don't know, I'm happy to partner with anybody who feels that they are, particularly driven to rewrite these and refresh these. So I'm happy to support with my team if needed.
So on the point of doing these super soon, right? Like we definitely can, but like it's kind of a choice. It maybe looks a little bit less good if we sort of like ruin the founder of MakerDAO, post something, and then everyone jumps to do the thing as quickly as possible. So like, do we maybe want to consider the whole sort of decentralization aspects and the possibility of actually sort of following our voted through governance processes, I guess, rather than doing something special?
Oh, I wouldn't follow a special governance process, right? Like,
well, the problem is doing it quickly is because the process to do something like this would normally be a MIP, which takes a month of like RSC time, right? And then it's voted on over 2 weeks. So that's like 6 weeks, which doesn't sound soon, or doesn't seem to be what you're saying in terms of soon. So
is there no other procedure that we have in place to do this?
Well, I mean, there's the weekly process, but the polls are up for like 3 days, right? So it's like, is that long enough to vote on something that's like a massive change of direction? I would argue no. Like, I think they're like too short as it is for like most things that we do, to be honest.
But we can stack it a little bit, right? So I think you can start with a simple forum poll or a signal request, and that would already set the tone, and then the final confirmation. Yeah, that could be a little later. I don't think that's an issue. I think the point is like starting with this as soon as possible and like having
right. Okay, so you're thinking like
the question on the table as soon as possible, right?
So we're sort of thinking of expressing a sort of broad support for this proposal like in principle, like earlier on, and then clarifying exactly what that will look like later on.
Yeah, honestly,
Yeah,
I think
I think so.
Okay.
I think it's absolutely crucial that we really sort of follow the like, I mean, if we're talking about like replacing the foundation principles, we absolutely have to sort of follow the process completely, and not just that, kind of like take additional steps to really, you know, I mean, I think one of the things I've noticed is that there are a few, like there are posts from people that basically say, you know, what the fuck, I'm out, right? There's a number of those, and I think we have to kind of like, there has to be a kind of response to, you know, there has to be some kind of attention given to that, right? And so really an attempt to, you know, an attempt to sort of quantify, you know, who and how many essentially are, you know, are actually against this, right? So that they're given a voice essentially, because that's fun. If we're gonna move on and be like, look, we you know, we've decided to do this, and that's what the community has decided. We have to actually know that there really wasn't, you know, there wasn't some kind of silent majority or something like that, right? And yeah, it's just so important. I mean, and another thing is we also have to really, right, like it can't just be like Rune writes wall of text and everyone gives stamp of approval, right? We need to sort of, there has to be an element of like, and I actually think, I think it's like, I just think what's already been going on now, where now we're talking about these principles and all this stuff, right? Which I didn't talk about at all in the beginning. I mean, that's, I didn't consider that at all at first. But there has to be this kind of processing, in a sense, in the DAO, right? So that it turns from being just me coming with a wall of text and now that's it. But it has to be me basically writing a bunch of ideas, inspiring others to then sort of chew on those ideas and come out with their own things, right? And then if what happens is everyone starts to come out with a kind of a logic that ultimately seems to align, then that's when we got something powerful, right? That's when we have this potential for the community to actually align and really be in sync around this. And that's, you know, and that's what we need, because that's the kind of the power we need to tap into.
Yeah, we'll kind of give some thought, I guess, over the next few days as to what process we can use that can sort of both do this quickly and to do it properly.
Definitely, and really appreciate you sharing further, Rune, and everyone who's contributed to the conversation so far today. Taking a look at the time here, I'm aware we're getting towards the end of things. So if you have other thoughts on the subject, now would be a good time to speak up. I imagine this will be as long as the kind of an ongoing process as we figure out ways to submit these questions through our governance. But yeah, for the moment, this will be the last chance to say anything about it on this call.
Also, while people think of their comments and last thoughts, I would like to plug that our summary team, which creates snippets, transcribed summaries, editorial summaries of public calls at MakerDAO, is looking for people to join. So we're looking for writers, we're looking for people to do quality assurance work. It's part-time, it pays, and reach out to me or Artem if you're interested in getting your foot in the door at Maker.
I want to add something, and I in favor of Rune's proposal and like change the priorities of Maker and Maker's vision, and it's that like we did like amazing things with our first ideas about banking the unbanked and like having this decentralized stable coin for people who lived in these countries with economical problems like Argentina and Venezuela. And with that in mind, we achieved like amazing things. And I think that because we were the first ones on doing it for real, like not just like telling that we wanted to help these countries, but we did something. We really changed the way how people live there. And well, I always tell you about this, but if you go to Argentina, like DAI is a common currency there, and people are saving in DAI. So after that, and this is for real, I experienced how different stable coins and DeFi protocols and crypto projects were paying more attention and trying to create solutions for this problem. So with these new objectives that we are proposing, I feel that we can also make a difference, and not just in this financial aspect, but like in a more broad aspect, that is climate change and how this will affect people's lives in the future. So I'm pretty sure that if we like move towards this objective, doing like real concrete things, this will be the first step, and others will follow. And I think that's great and amazing.
I just want to add one thing, which is I think we should also make sure we don't sort of forget financial inclusion, or or like and that I think that's really, I mean, the brand and all, I mean, you have to have that clarity. So, and that's kind of been that was the problem, a big part of the problem with the original foundation principles, that it was both talking about sustainability and financial inclusion and so on. But I guess I think it would be a huge mistake for us if we somehow sort of drop the ball on the wins we've already created, but then also the potential that still exists. Then of course, the argument I think could also be made is that basically because climate change is going to dominate everything, then like financial inclusion in the future world is mostly going to focus on financial inclusion when it comes to being able to use finance to protect yourself from the outcome of climate change, for instance. That's gonna, like that might itself actually be the one of the best ways to follow that principle. But yeah, I feel like that's really important, that we can't sort of turn our backs on the fact that we've had this incredible success in Argentina and this potential that still exists. That, and especially the worst would be if it's sort of it is perceived that, oh, we tried it and we failed or something, or we gave up on that, right? Like that, because that certainly don't think that's the case. And I think also, like, when we get things like L2 and so on, we can really get back in the game to a certain extent, right? And there's going to be this whole new universe of doing financial inclusion and dealing with the last mile, even as a DAO and so on. But arguably, it's not like what we can do when it comes to actual systemic push for climate action. That I mean, like I said earlier, it's the thing everyone needs to consider, sort of whenever they pretty much do any kind of work, in my opinion.
Appreciate those reflections there. Is there anyone else looking to add to the conversation? Seems like
I think MakerDAO has a ton of potential to do a ton of good in the world. That's all I'm gonna say.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate everyone for coming and participating. And as always, the discussions will continue in the forum and on chat. For now, still on Rocket Chat. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming. And appreciate the discussion.